All right, whenever you're ready, Danielle.
You are live, Mr. Chairman.
All right, good afternoon, Corporations Committee. We're going to continue on House Bill 143 today before taking up the recall elections bill. With that, Barb, if you would call the roll.
Okay. Representative Blackburn. Here. Representative Clausen. Here. Representative Clifford. Here. Representative Duncan. Here. Vice Chairman Ayer.
Here.
Representative Hunt. Here. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Here. Chairman Swanitzer.
Here.
Thank you.
Give me just a second, committee, because the bill sponsor walked out of the room. There he is. Representative Blackburn, we're still going to be continuing on House Bill 143. Wanted to see if you had any additional comment to kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a wonderful day to finish this up as quickly as we might be able to. I think there's people that testify, so I'm not going to hold the mic for any longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I know we were in the middle of testimony from Ms. Gleam. Let me bring her back in the room. Julie, I know we cut you short last time. Just wanted to see if you had any additional comments on House Bill 143.
I'll pass it on to some of the other witnesses that are in the room.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you had a shot because we ran out of time last committee meeting, but certainly stick around, and if we have anything, we'll certainly call on you. All right, so members of the audience, anyone here to testify on House Bill 143? This would be the Municipal Services Recovery Actions. Mr. Schilling, welcome to Corporations. And just make sure the green light is on the microphone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. Justin Schilling with Wyoming Association of Municipalities. The Association of Municipalities, obviously, as we've been in the past with this particular bill, when it's been brought in other forms, do stand in opposition to this bill for several obvious reasons. I apologize, I wasn't able to be here Wednesday. We're doing some training with some of our members, but I was able to listen into the testimony remotely. And the good representative from District 5 was talking about some easy and obvious solutions to this issue based on how the largest city in her district does things. I'm a common sense guy. I like easy solutions. And honestly, I was buying what she was selling a little bit, but I'm also inquisitive. So the question came to mind, is this really the easy common sense answer? If it is really the easy common sense answer, why doesn't everybody do it? So I reached out to the 98 cities and towns that WHAM represents across the state and asked just that. The answers I got back were really varied and very unique from each municipality and how they handle these collection actions when it comes to municipal services. Majority of those I talked to do collect some kind of deposit. The average range generally between $150 to $200 per municipal utility customer. But nearly every member of that majority also stated that even with the deposit system in place, that they end up having to write off a considerable amount of bad debt at the end of the year. With no forwarding information available for these runaway tenants, they're left to pursue expensive and many times fruitless collection actions to try to recoup that bad debt. After all attempted collection actions against the tenant have been exhausted, in many cases, our communities have an ordinance that the property owner acknowledges that they are on the hook for the remainder of the debt at the time of the application for service, which each new round of tenants. That in my mind is perhaps the most important point here. The cities and towns that collect from landlords as a last resort don't do so punitively. In truth, they're acting fiduciarily on behalf of all the good customers that pay their bills on time and whose for-profit business does not regularly expose the entire utility to enhanced loss of risk or risk of loss. Sorry. In the end, this bill will not hurt the 99 cities and towns of Wyoming, as the enterprise funds that provide for their utilities operations and maintenance are separate from their general fund accounts. By statute, however, those enterprise funds must be maintained at a certain level of liquidity. And many of our members made a point that the write-off of all these bad debt is a key contributor to rate increases that negatively affect all utility customers. So to the point that the goal of any government should be to do the most good for the most people, this bill does the inverse, offering relief to a small minority engaged in a for-profit business to the detriment and harm of the vast majority of Wyomingites. So what's a better solution? In talking with some of my members and trying to wrap my mind around the concept, given that most shut-off actions and the administration thereof has to do with rental customers, in visiting with our bigger municipalities, more than 50% of the shutoffs that they have to physically go out and do, and then the turn back ons are for renters at a large administrative cost. Obviously, the administration of a deposit system would be an extra burden on all of our municipalities if they don't already collect one, especially for our smallest municipalities where maybe it's a clerk treasurer behind the desk running that town day to day. For them to figure that out, run a whole separate account, which it would have to be to handle the banking for that, for those deposits, to be able to refund them and to be able to keep them on hand to be refunded in a timely manner. The city of Laramie does very much that. They have an owner-only policy when it comes to their utility accounts in Laramie. I asked, well, and their response was, the landlords in our city don't want us to charge a deposit. For them, it's a fiscal concern. If there's a $200 deposit on top of first and last month's rent, on top of a deposit to Black Hills Energy, on top of, plus, a lot of those students can't afford it. It makes it prohibitive. And it makes properties where that landlord has agreed basically to get the bills, administrate that cost into an invoice to their tenant, which was much the way it was for me when I was at the university in the late 90s. I didn't set up a utility account. I was 19 years old. My landlord was probably smart to not have me set up a utility account, or it could have been trouble. But the way that they did it, of course, was I would get an invoice with my rent payment, as well as the previous month's utilities on it each month. The way Laramie does it now is even more innovative, in that at the time a new tenant moves in, the property owner is always on the account. As a new tenant moves in each time, the property owner can choose to put that tenant on the account as a third-party payer. So all of the bills go out in tandem to both the property owner as well as the tenant, and the tenant can pay it as a third party. It allows the property owner to monitor the payment of those utilities. It also leaves them in control of the account, which, to the benefit of the property owners in many other states, and much of the research that I did on this particular subject, gives the property owner a certain amount of leverage, especially if you have a tenant that's begun to not pay rent. That's one more lever to pull before you go through the full administrative action of an eviction. If you can go shut off the water, they might think about paying their rent. But even the way that Laramie does it, which is unique to their community, but fits their circumstance very, very well, would be illegal with the passage of this bill. The section in B says that if there's a tenant living in that property and the landlord doesn't reside at that property, that we can't basically force that landlord into contracting for that utility. So it would make Laramie's way of doing things illegal. And across the state, it's very much of a patchwork. I talked with the folks in Riverton. They require a deposit, but their landlords also have to sign on the dotted line that they understand that they're due for any excess that goes over and above that deposit. City of Gillette actually does credit checks. They were the only one that I got a response from that actually does a credit check specifically on their new utility customers when they come to apply for service. Obviously, that's some expense to the city. There's some administrative cost of doing that for each new potential applicant. And what they do is it's on a sliding scale then. If that person comes back with 800 credit, they don't have to pay a deposit. If they've got 600 credit, or if they've been a past, obviously too, if they've been a past customer of the city and utility and they've had past due payments, it's going to be at the high end of that scale. But a lot of that flexibility, that sort of, our communities, it's always very hard to get them all under the same tent with one solution. But a lot of that flexibility kind of gets called into doubt based on the language, especially of that last section of the bill. The other question I had from one other member is, what about short-term rentals? Short-term vacation rentals in that last section and the applicability of it as well. Obviously, the landowner, property owner doesn't live at that address, and they are entering into short-term rental agreements. Depending on the function, your VRBOs, your Airbnbs, they are entering into a short-term rental agreement with those folks that stay. So where does that, how muddy does that water get? So with that, again, the vast majority of them, well, our organization as a whole has in the past been in opposition to this bill. We maintain the opposition to this bill, not because it'll hurt our communities, but it's going to hurt our ratepayers across the board.
All right. Let me ask a question. So the bill addresses trash or recycling collection services, municipal waterworks or sanitary sewer systems. Are there communities that have those differentiated where there's a separate trash and recycling versus a separate waterworks? I would think any waterworks and sanitary sewer are the same in the larger communities. But
It depends on whether or not you're in maybe a Board of Public Utilities model. Sometimes the city is specifically responsible for, say, trash collection, whereas Board of Public Utilities is in charge of your pipeable goods, so your water and wastewater. So you may have, you could potentially in a community have two deposits if those are two separate accounts to the customer.
And there are 99 municipalities under WHAM's review?
We represent 98. There are 99 in the state.
Got it. Okay, that would make your testimony, that makes sense. Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schilling, most utilities have gone to some form of online payment and bank wire transfer, online billing, online transfer payment. Are there any municipalities in Wyoming have done that?
That have gone to, I'm sorry, Representative Bear.
Gone to online billing?
A lot of them. A lot of them you can opt into a paperless billing. We worked with that pretty significantly during this last Amendment A initiative that was on the ballot. Some of our municipalities offered some little fact bullet points on some of their utility bills talking about Amendment A. So we kind of got the lay of the land of who does electronic and who still does paper. It's obviously the direction everybody's headed. And with some of, in talking with Laramie, I believe that to be the case with them because they do send those bills out to both the property owner as well as the tenant. But the impression I got is that those were both sent electronically so that it wasn't a big extra administrative expense of 2 stamps and, all of those things that kind of send everything in a dual track.
Right.
Follow up? Go ahead.
Well, that kind of addressed my follow-up question is what effect does that have on this issue that we're talking about in here?
Feeling if you know.
And you mentioned that it does make it easier to do dual billing, of course,
Mhm.
less costly.
The dual billing in a lot of other communities, even the ones that don't necessarily have the landlords on the contract, still do it. I was kind of surprised with how much footwork a lot of our municipalities were sort of doing on behalf of the property owners in a lot of cases where they were sending out, they would send out extra bills, they would mail shut-off notices to the property owner, even though the property owner wasn't on the account. So I think the municipalities to a large degree, have kind of more than met folks in the middle when it comes to trying to communicate and trying to give property owners a heads up, especially if they're starting to run into those situations where somebody's probably gonna, might skip out of the apartment, because a lot of times that's when the most damage is done. Things get left on, that somebody turns off the heat but leaves the water on, to where you have a bunch of damage, those kinds of things. So I think that the spirit of those things has always been to be as cooperative as possible and as helpful as possible to the folks that do maintain those rental properties within their communities. Because it does end up kind of heading off problems for both sets of folks. So.
Good. Okay, Reverend Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know if you have the answer to this, but take a stab at it. In some of our gas companies, at least in my area, they have a online capability for landlords to set up parameters, especially like in the winter, where immediately it reverts to the landlord to automatically put them in payment default, where it automatically reverts to the landlord in the case of a tenant leaves, shut off, whatever. How many of our municipalities have something in place like that? Because the landlord can actually set it up year round, or they can do it during the cold months or something like that for their gas heat. Do any of our municipalities have anything like that?
Mr. Schilling, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, I don't think, I haven't heard of anything that's structured specifically from any of our municipalities. I know a lot of times they will raise a red flag with the property owner, say if it looks like you're filling a swimming pool and it's an apartment, and they're looking at thousands and thousands of gallons flowing through the meter. And again, you look at an apartment, a lot of them do, especially our smaller communities where they've really got their thumb on what the specific situations may be. They're pretty quick to let property owners know that there's something very amiss as far as the utilities that are going out at that particular property. Because it may be a problem, again, say if you had a tenant that left in the middle of the night and they turned the thermostat off, but the water was still in the pipes and those pipes broke, well, it may look like you're filling a swimming pool because you're actually filling your basement. So, I think again, they try to more than meet the property owners that are doing business in their communities more than, as far past halfway as they possibly can administratively, given the resources that they have.
Will Mr. Schilling build a basement swimming pool for you? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Schilling, has any of your communities ever come together about pooling resources? And maybe, because some of your communities are doing a really great job and some maybe are lacking in some areas, like all of our municipalities, excel in some places and not so well in others. Have they ever tried to come together and maybe, centralize or pool their resources and try and collaborate? Especially in this area with softwares and who's doing it, right and who's not, and just really try to come together and just across the whole, state and really pull together. Has there ever been some talks about efficiencies across the state?
Mr. Schilling.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, our particular organization doesn't maintain professional training for folks that are in the public utility realm. There are organizations that do that. And just like we try to share best practices amongst our folks for, basically local government operations and administration, they do the same when it comes to those public utilities. The biggest thing that I learned in talking with my utilities and the individual communities on this one is just how much it really does vary from municipality to municipality based on not only unique need, but circumstance. Again, the example of Laramie is a very good one. A lot of our municipalities said, we didn't have it on our books that landlords were liable for any leftover debt until X. They just had so much in a given year, or it had become a habitual problem over a series of years to where they had to try to find a solution because it was the other flip side to that political coin is, as you know, ratepayers love rate increases. So at some point that, you know, that comes due if you're constantly going to your voters with rate increases too, that even though you aren't the cause, but it's hard to explain the cause sometimes too, in a way that ratepayers don't hold you accountable.
Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schilling, so, and maybe you have this information, maybe you don't, but of your members, what percentage of their enterprise accounts are budgeted for loss or non-payment, or do you have that information?
I don't. I could certainly get back to you with that. I'd have to ask, and I'm sure it varies by community. There may be some state statutory there that I'm not aware of, but I could definitely get back to you on that with that information.
Okay. Further questions for the Wyoming Association of Municipalities? Or the people who herd cats? I mean, keep up the good work, Mr. Schilling. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
All right, come on down, sir, and then we'll get to Ms. Urbikite online. Welcome to corporations. Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm Kelly Craco, the mayor of town of Albin. I'm also Wyoming Association of Municipalities Legislative Leadership Chairman. So I'm not going to take up a lot of time. Justin covered it very well, but I can tell you from a town that we have a business where the people rotate through. We had this issue, and this is the main reason that we went to the landowners, because obviously they have a lot more recourse. They can vent their clients. We don't have a lot of that. So it is important to the cities and towns. I know ours, we had a lot of problem with that. And now that eliminated the problem of it. So again, oppose the bill and happy to ask any questions you may have.
So Mayor, how many, is it 91? I mean, I can't remember, what's your population of your community?
About 182.
And so just quickly, if you could walk us through, how do you do it, landlord tenant? You just put it all on the landlord and?
Well, here's how we done it, because we did have problems. The way we set it up, the ordinance is the bill goes to the landowner. However, we do work with the landowners because we have some that live in Sheridan. So what we done on there is we will set it up where the renters can go to their name and they can pay it. However, if that goes in fault or past the deadline, then the owner as well as them get a letter. And then if it's not paid, the landowner knows that they are responsible for that is not paid. But at least it gives them a chance to have their tenants come and pay it, and it makes it a little easier. But the bottom line is, if it doesn't get paid, it goes back to the landowner.
Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you guys charge a deposit
No,
from the tenant? No.
no,
Do you charge a deposit from the owner?
no.
Mr. Chairman.
I would imagine, everybody who's kind of moving in and out of town, and if somebody does fly by night, it's fairly obvious within a day or two, I would think, in Albin, but maybe not downtown Albin. Representative.
Just to make sure I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, just to make sure I understand. So do you have signed agreements with the landowner?
Yep.
You have no signed agreements with the tenant?
No.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, how many properties do you have out there that are landlord tenant?
Oh, I have to look that up. I'm guessing right now, probably around 15.
Thank you.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Urbikite, I see you there on the internet. Welcome to corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lori Urbikite. I'm representing the Wyoming Realtors, and we support this bill. I own property in the middle or in my hometown, and many years ago, that municipality changed to they put the utility in the renter's name. But the landowner was always still liable for it if it was not paid. When the tenant got behind in the bill, they would send a second notice to the landowner. So at least the landowner had some idea what was going on. They had two options on the deposit. You could either, they would charge the tenant a deposit and then take the deficit of what they didn't pay out of that first, which was never enough, obviously. Or the landlord could sign a waiver and say, no, you don't have to pay a deposit. I will guarantee it. So, which sounds okay, other than their deposit is now $150. Many years ago, it was $100. I know the house that I own in that community, a lot of it probably because of the yard, the summer water bill is going to easily be over $300 a month. So the municipality has those records. They have records of what the water usage was on that property going back from the day it went online. It seems to me that you should maybe take a look at those different properties. And if it's a tenant situation, you should maybe take a deposit large enough to cover at least one full month, if not 2 months. Now, is that going to work well in the community that has our only university? Well, you know, there are expenses that happen when kids go to school. Excuse me. I got to pay for my daughter's college education, so I know that. But I can assure you that there are a lot of landlords in that community, because I spoke with one of them that manages several rental units that are not happy with the way that city does it either. The bottom line is we look at this as a utility and a consumer one of those, a utility that a consumer is utilizing, and they should be the ones that have to pay the bill. Just as it is with the gas companies don't come back on the property owner. It is the user's duty to pay that bill. And if the municipalities, they have the ability to look at those past records to see what kind of deposit they need. And I would think that would be a very easy solution for them, at least one. Now, as far as the short-term rentals, I do not see that as a problem. In a lot of large apartment complexes, there's only one water meter. So the landlord is liable for all that. I mean, it's not individually metered. It cannot be billed separately. If you have an Airbnb or a Vrbo, one of those, you're not going to say, oh, family that's coming into town for 2 weeks over Frontier Days, you have to go down to the city and apply to get water in your name. I mean, that's not going to happen. Those kind of fees, those kind of rental properties are going to include those utilities. In fact, most of them include all the utilities. When we have rented a duplex or a house in the capital city during session, we were fortunate enough to find three of them over the years that were fully furnished and all utilities were paid by the owner, because we were only going to be there for a month or 2 months. And so to go down and put the utilities in our name was ridiculous. So I don't think the short-term rental problem is an issue. I certainly, the idea about the landlord can turn off the water, well, that's easier said than done. And evictions are easier said than done. And you can turn off the water and then you can have people stay in your unit for 3 to 4 months while you're trying to get them evicted. And I know this because it happened to me in the city I live in now, in the center of the state. And that is not a good deal. We will be spending thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars repairing that unit. So shutting off the water thinking you're going to get people to move out is not, it's a lovely concept, but it doesn't always happen. So, Mr. Chairman, we do, and the one other thing I wanted to bring forward, and I think the speaker from the municipalities hit it right on the nose. This is so varied across the entire state. No one knows. And there are people that do own rental properties all across our state. It would be nice if we had one rule. And so indeed, it is different from community to community. And we support this bill. We supported it last year and we hope, or 2 years ago when it was here last, and we would hope the committee would at least move it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Urbicate. So could you expound on your support for the bill? Is it because a large amount of your members are also landlord property owners, or is it more of a philosophical when it comes to real estate?
No, Mr. Chairman, a number of our members, a large number of our members are property managers. And a lot of them in the smaller communities, they're property managers as well as listing and selling real estate. We do have some larger firms that are just property managers. In the capital city, I know of some, and in the center of the state. But in the smaller communities, as an added service to buyers and sellers, or to the buyers, basically to the owners, a lot of real estate offices have a property management division within their office. And so this is a very prevalent issue around the state of Wyoming. It's how I got my start in real estate, as a matter of fact.
Further questions for Ms. Urbicate, the Wyoming Association of Realtors? Not seeing any. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
We're gonna let in Mr. Siglin. How many other people in the audience today are wanting to testify on 143? Mr. Brooks, you want another bite? Okay. All right, we'll get you in a second. Mr. Siglin, welcome to Corporations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is George Siglin. I'm the mayor of the town of Lingle, where my good representative, I see her sitting on the board, just lives right up the street from me. So anyway, I'm here to testify, or perhaps echo the sentiments from my good colleague from the town of Albany and his situation, and also from my good colleague from the WAM. In our town, I stand opposed to this bill because currently in our town, we do have by ordinance that the landlord has to keep a deposit on record, and so does the tenant by ordinance. And as was mentioned before, Section B, if this bill goes forward, well, that will just eliminate all that. And I would like to echo the sentiments that I would like to say that you would think that you shouldn't have too much problems between your landlords and tenants paying your bills, but unfortunately, given in this day and age, it is an issue. Currently, right now, we are 7 tenants who are behind on their bills. And what we do here in Lingles, we send out the bills. Once they get behind, we send the landlord a bill also to let them know. In our town, you almost have a grace period from the time that you get the bill to 30 days to pay it. And we try to do everything we can to help out, whether it be a homeowner who's having a problem or a tenant who's having a problem financially. We try to do our best. But in the situation there with the tenants, we will notify the landlord that they are getting behind. And we try to do every, remediation that we possibly can before we ask the landlord, your tenant's gone. We have tried to chase them down. We have our town attorney try to, you can take small claims court or more if you have to, even get a collection service. But sometimes it's time to go through all that. That ends up costing you more than what they owe you. So sometimes that is not very economically feasible for us to do that. But we do try to work with them. But if this bill goes forward, then what happens to us that we end up losing, and I hate to use this term, we end up losing the only leverage that the municipality has, and that is to turn off the water, sewer. Yeah, try to figure out how to stop that. You just can't turn off, but you can turn off the water. And in our town, in the garbage, we contract with a independent garbage company, and we have dumpsters in the alley. So even if you say, well, you can't use that, the tenant stays there, can't use it, he just walks out there, throws in a dumpster anyway. There's no way to monitor that. So I would urge you to not move this bill forward. That is very, very detrimental to municipalities that trying to recover their cost. And the way things are going, as everybody knows in the revenue in the state of Wyoming, that towns we're all going to be taking hit, and this will just be another hit for us. With that, I thank you for allowing me to be here to testify, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siglin. And I'm really happy you were on. It's my understanding the town of Lingle has a municipal power system for your utilities. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We
Do
do,
you-
Mr. Chairman, we have our own electricity.
So do you treat your rates, your service contracts for your electric and gas utility the same as you do for your water and trash?
Mr. Chairman, our electric rates, as people like to say, we were fortunate to have our own electric power. We call that our bread and butter. Our deposit for the electrical rate is a lot higher than the deposits for the water, sewer, and garbage.
So you treat them similarly, you just have a higher rate on the electric?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct.
Further, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Siglin, and thanks for coming to see us again. Always a pleasure. I remember you from this committee quite a little, and I also remember you keep a pretty good idea on your finances in the town of Lingle. What percentage of loss do you have built into your enterprises accounts, and what percentage of loss do you actually realize, or do you think you have that information in front of you, roughly?
Mr. Siglin, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, right at the moment, I don't have it in front of me. We try not to budget, as most municipalities do. You try not to budget for a loss because you don't expect to have a loss, because by statute, we're not supposed to be losing money, but we do have it. Some losses that occur, return checks, for example, be one. But in our budget per se for the water and the garbage and sewer, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head. I do not believe that is a budgeted. There is a loss budgeted in there.
Okay, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, can you tell me how we calculate in Lingle a potential deposit for a new renter tenant? How is that calculated?
Mr. Siglin, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, we do a flat rate deposit on our utilities. So there is no percentage of calculation on prior use or any of that. It's just a flat rate.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in Lingle, we don't look at usage. We don't do credit checks. We don't double check and see if it matches or usage or anything of the sort.
Mr. Siglin.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, in the town of Lingle, when it comes to the garbage, I don't know how you would accomplish that. When it comes to sewer, I do not know how you would accomplish that. When it comes to water, the town of Lingle, fortunately, we only have water meters on our bigger commercial users. Most residents do not have a water meter, so we do not do that. On our electricity, we can monitor that.
All right, follow up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as far as electricity, I understand we could do a flat rate for the sewer, garbage and water, but however, on our electricity, we can do it on that. So are we not doing a percentage or a average use or something like that? I know in our neighboring town of Torrington, they take an average or the highest 2 months out of the year, and that's how they calculate that. So are we not doing something along those lines to make sure that we're getting a high enough deposit to cover some of those rates?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, currently, we do not monitor our electric rates to determine whether a deposit should be higher or lower. Right now, our deposit is just a flat rate deposit for our electrical rates.
Okay. Further questions to the mayor? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I hear you might be here for the next bill as well in a bit.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. I think Mr. Weaver is coming in. And then Mr. Brooks, after that, I'll have you come back. We'll let Ms. Renfro in as well. First up, Mr. Weaver, the floor is yours, or Commissioner Weaver, or Councilman Weaver. I'm sorry, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I was not going to initially share any testimony on this, but given the, Mr. Chairman, given the number of questions that have been raised by the sort of Laramie-centric questions here, I thought I'd make myself available, and I can provide a little bit of a brief rundown about Laramie's system for handling this, if that's what the chair and the committee would like, and keep it fairly quick.
Anybody need more information on Laramie? Mr. Weaver is one of their city council.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am a member of the city council, currently serving as the mayor of Laramie as well. And
you're the mayor currently? Wow.
Yes, yes, sir.
So, Mr. Weaver,
I'm not sure how to react to that reaction, Mr. Chairman, but
so, committee, you need to understand that Mr. Weaver was an intern here, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago when I started. So as a fellow young person, and then he also is an instructor at a college. He used to teach in the room next to me when I taught at night. So I just missed the memo. Sorry. Anybody? It's nice when you see people you've grown up with in politics take leadership roles. Anybody have any questions on the Laramie municipal system or how they do it? Anybody want more information? I'm not sitting here right now, Paul, but if I get some testimony, don't go too far, okay?
All right, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would also just share that, like many of the other members from WAM, we have some concerns about this legislative proposal, because we feel that our system has been put in place over a number of years, and we've worked out some of the local issues to where we've found a system that works for everyone, tenants, property owners, and the city itself. So I would just add my voice of concern along with the rest of those that you've heard today from some of the representatives of the cities. And I appreciate those kind words, Mr. Chairman. I remain a enthusiastic follower of your political career as well, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. Don't go too far in trophy video though. Ms. Renfro, welcome to Corporations. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am the managing broker for a property management company in Cheyenne, Legacy Property Solutions. And I know we've been talking about some very small towns in our state with maybe 15 rentals within the whole city. There was a survey done in January for the city of Cheyenne for the CARES money. And the survey determined that there were 200 evictions in the month of January in the city of Cheyenne, with $250,000 in damages and costs to the landlords. I think this is a common sense bill. I don't think that the way things have been done for the past 70 years is the way they need to be done today. From yesterday's testimony, the BOPU did say that they had the software in place, which they paid over $1 million for. I would assume they would want to use that software since we have that much money invested in it. And as a property management company, we collect deposits all the time. I mean, that's what we do in our business. It's in fact, when I came into this business about 30 years ago, we did it by hand on ledgers. So it's not really rocket science. It especially if we have $1 million software program, I'm assuming that program will do all the tracking for the BOPU. And another thing, I think there's kind of a fallacy when it comes to the owners of these properties. We have many owners that we work for that are elderly folks who worked all their lives to invest in this property to make sure that they have funds to help them in their retirement. And when they are being asked to pay a $400 bill out of maybe a $700 a month rental, that hurts those folks. And it really does cut into what they need for their living. So, and then as far as collecting deposits, it's been my experience that with tenants, they believe that they are entitled to their deposit back, whether they are or not. They're going to give you their forwarding address, assuming they're going to get that money back. And if they don't get the money back and you have a forwarding address, you can always send the bill to that address. And I have a real problem with BOPU feeling that simply because we rent to someone that it's our responsibility to pay their bills or to maybe sit down at their kitchen table and make sure those bills are paid. As property managers, we wear a lot of hats. That's not one of them. And I don't feel that because someone is not responsible enough to pay their bill, that it should be passed on to another individual to pay that bill. I don't know any company that passes bills on to another individual because another individual didn't pay that bill. I just don't get that philosophy. And then it was mentioned yesterday that the city felt that they were subsidizing landlords or being asked to subsidize landlords. That's not what we're asking. We're asking for them to collect their own bills and not give us their uncollected bills to collect. I would also like to speak on the portion of the bill that deals with the trash.
Okay.
In the city of Cheyenne, we are not allowed to contract with another company. We're kind of being held hostage by the city to use their services, and their services are very expensive. If we were allowed to contract with another company, we could get those services a whole lot cheaper. And I do have some examples. We have a fourplex in the city that has a 2-yard dumpster. The cost of that dumpster per month is $206.44. We have a 2-yard dumpster at my office. The cost of that dumpster is $117.01. Now they're both 2 yards, so I know that they have different levels for different businesses, but when it comes down to it, 2 yards is 2 yards. And then I have a friend who lives in the county who contracts with a private company. He has a 3-yard dumpster, so it's a yard bigger than these other two that I gave you examples of. Costs her $75 a month, and they have to drive out in the county to get to it. So I just feel that this is a common sense bill. I feel that, and another thing that I want to bring up is we do our due diligence to screen our tenants to make sure we have the best tenant we can get for our owners. And sometimes people fall through the cracks, but we pull credit reports. And when we pull the credit report, that tells us how responsible that person is with their credit. Now, because BOPU does not track the folks that don't pay their bills, one person can go from one property to another property to another property to another property, leaving unpaid bills in each of those properties. We have no way of knowing that. Now, if Board of Public Utilities were collecting their own bills and reporting to the credit reporting agencies, letting us know that there are unpaid utilities, we wouldn't rent to that person because utilities are a huge issue for us. But we have no way to know. And even if we call Board of Public Utilities and ask them about a person, they don't track that. That's why that person can go from property to property to property and get water put into their name each time with no penalty to them. And that's basically all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Ms. Renfro? Am not seeing any right now, Ms. Renfro. Certainly appreciate you coming today.
Thank you.
All right. Any other further public comment besides Mr. Brooks? I know, did you have anything you wanted to add? Give you one more bite at the apple. Floor is yours.
There we go. Yes, I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, the opportunity just to speak again. I'll make this very, very quick. I think I made very clearly the other day, we're opposed to this bill. I think you know how the Board of Public Utilities stands. I would mention two things. One is, I know there's a lot of discussion this morning on electric and gas. This bill doesn't pertain to electric and gas. So it's very clear water, sewer, and sanitation. And that is one comment I made the other day, that in the past, the bill had referenced electric and gas, and I didn't see that. So the other was just follow up. Me being the type of person I am, when somebody tells me something, I want to check it out. And so I know in our discussion the other day, there was a lot of discussion with Representative Duncan about Torrington and that her community did it right. They charged deposits. And so I said, well, if they're doing something right, I want to talk and find out, maybe it's something we can do better. I know Mr. Troxel up there, Tom Troxel is the utility supervisor. So I called him yesterday and actually talked to him. And he straightened me out on some things. And I just want to share those with you because I think it's important that everybody knows the facts. And that is, they do charge a deposit. Their deposit is strictly for their electric utility. So they are one that does have an electric utility. That's just been the rule of thumb. They do not charge a deposit for their water and sewer. Their city council to date has not let them charge multiple deposits. They do bill the renter. They right now do not go after the landlord. Their council has not allowed them to do that, although he has written several letters to their council, in which I actually have one copy, encouraging them to do that because of the losses they have. And for them, I asked him, is it a serious issue for him? And his very exact words was, it's a very, very serious issue, to the tune of $80,000 to $90,000 a year that they write off on unpaid bills. So I just felt that it was important that everybody knows that. It was made clear the other day that Torrington does not have any issues. I think it's important for everybody to know that Torrington does have issues. And that's the tune of about $80,000, $90,000 a year. So I just wanted to make sure that that was brought back before you. Again, I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
So two questions.
Yeah.
In Cheyenne, does trash and recycling fall under BOPU as well?
No, sir.
That's a separate operating.
Yes, correctly. So the city, we do their billing, but they do and collect their money and send it to them, but they handle any other delinquent payments. We only handle the water and sewer as far as any delinquency or payments.
And then I'm not sure if you want to agree or disagree on the question. When you have a certain amount of unpaid debt, let's say 80,000 in Torrington, do you take that into account when setting water rates, knowing that there'll be a certain percentage of people who historically you'll have unclaimed debt? Does that factor in any kind of percentage or in a way into calculating what the current water rate for other residents is?
I would say the answer to that is no, but bottom line, we look at the amount of cash that we have to do projects and to finance projects and what we're going to get loan and grants for projects. And so when we do that, and that number and the amount of money we have is what we figure, or how we figure determining our rate basis. So I would say we don't do it specifically, but bottom line, it's our dollar amount that we look at.
Okay, makes sense. Representative Blackburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, you began your testimony saying that you were going to check with Torrington to see how they did it so that you could do it right or better. You found out that they don't do a deposit, but they do bill the tenants. That's all this bill is asking, is bill the tenant. I do believe I remember reading in the paper that the city does reimburse the Board of Public Utilities for unpaid water bills. Am I wrong?
The city of
Sure, Mr.
Cheyenne. No,
Mr. Brooks, if you know.
no, the city of Cheyenne does not pay for water and sewer.
Does anyone? Does anyone not pay, but do they reimburse you for bad debt?
Does the city of Cheyenne ever reimburse BOPU for bad debt or
Not,
I mean, they're the ones who put the laws on you, right? You have to
Correct.
follow the ordinances, but they haven't done anything.
they
You've
do not
never
reimburse us.
No. All right, thank you, sir.
further questions. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Let me just make sure there's no further public comment. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure on House Bill 143? Moved by Duncan. We'll go seconded from Hunt. Committee discussion. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to work on some wording, so I will have an amendment prepared for section 2 to take into account for Airbnbs and VRBOs and take care of that. So I will email it to you over the weekend, but I think I'll have a committee of the whole amendment for that. So I don't have any words right now, but
I do have one more question for maybe Wham. If you look on page 2, it says a city or town which operates a trash or recycling collection service, municipal waterworks. Is BOPU considered a municipal waterworks operated by the city or town of Cheyenne? Or are you an independent agency? My next question then real quick, would under this, if this law passed, would you ever think of becoming privatized or issuing, there's no way for a municipal waterworks or a trash service to completely independently contract with a third party to provide these services? Are you stuck being a municipal waterworks is my question, or would there be an interesting way to get around this law? Just checking. All right. Representative Clausen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm in favor of this bill. Just thinking about the nature of this, it's a service, not necessarily a commodity. So it's a service that provides, and the cost to the municipality isn't necessarily on a per gallon basis. It's more of a service that's all split out through their enterprise funds, and they're statutorily required to keep reserves and the whole shebang. And then as a state, we actually subsidize these. We just had this discussion on the floor at a very large rate. So passing on this, where I'm getting to is if there's a percentage of loss built into this, I don't think that's a problem for the other municipality or participants of the service. And I don't think that loss should lay on the landlord. So I'll be in favor.
Further testimony, Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to say, this is a local issue that we're trying to find a statewide solution for. I think it should be solved at the local level. It's a city problem. They're closer to the people, and we always say we believe in local control until we don't get the results we want from our local officials, and then we go to the state to try to bail them out. Municipal utilities are not regulated under the theory that the users have the right to control what the city does through the ballot box. That's why they're not regulated like public utilities are. And if you have a problem with your local utility, you should solve it with the local utility. Applying a one-size-fits-all to all municipalities throughout the state is not the solution.
Further testimony, further discussion or amendments? Not seeing any other. Barb, if you'd call the roll on House Bill 143, I believe.
Representative Blackburn.
Aye.
Representative Clausen.
Aye.
Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan.
Aye.
Vice Chair Air.
No.
Representative Hunt.
Aye.
Representative McGuire, aye. Representative Roscoe.
Come on. Jimmy.
Probably won't make a difference, but when the roster goes out.
Hey, I vote no.
Thank you. Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye.
6 ayes, 3 noes.
Okay, so Representative Blackburn, you'll floor manage House Bill 143. Okay. Committee, I apparently have to deal with a quick marijuana issue and another quick issue. So we will hear Representative Bear's bill at 1:15 in about 3 minutes. All right.
Because when I spoke, Danny, you know, I was gonna say that I'm not mad. Don't misunderstand.
They would say what most of their.
They're gonna say that, they're gonna say that. You're not talking to me, so forget it.
Did our chairman leave?
I don't know where the, maybe the bathroom, but she got it. Okay.
Hey, did Dan leave?
All right, committee, give us about 30 seconds and we will return. All right, committee, please welcome back. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 74, elected officials removal, brought to us from Representative Bear. Welcome, Representative Bear. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. I appreciate your time today reviewing this particular bill. Today, I bring you House Bill 74, and this is simply updating statutes to make them usable by the citizenry of Wyoming. This is dealing with something that has been part of the fabric of this country since the Articles of Confederation. We've had recalls. It's been a part of accountability for elected officials. For the state of Wyoming, back in 1957, the statute allowing the recall of elected officials was codified and assigned to Title number 15. Unfortunately, the people of Wyoming were not able to use this law because it was filed in Chapter 4, which is alternative forms of government. I'm sorry, Chapter 4, Article 1, which is for commission-style governments. I can wait. Just background music, I believe.
For members on the internet, we're taking a 10-second technical break. All right. Welcome back. I'm going to Bear. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, this particular statute was filed under Chapter 4, Alternative Forms of Government, Article 1, which is commission-style governments. The state of Wyoming at this time does not have any commission-style governments in cities or towns. So back in 2008, a particular community tried to do a recall of one of their elected officials. And unfortunately, they found out that they were not able to do so. The recall was successful as far as the number of required petitions, but the person being recalled contested, and it went to court, and it went to the district court level, where it was determined that the legislature filed this particular statute in the wrong portion of law, and therefore it could not be used by the citizenry. So today I'm just asking that we move this particular statute to a more usable position in the statutes. But I have made a small change. While investigating this issue, I reached out to small town mayors and asked them for their input, and found that their opinion was that the threshold in the original statute was much too low. And I tend to agree with them. And so we took the statute and we made it slightly different. We created a higher threshold for the number of petitions that were required for smaller towns. And you'll see this on page 2 when I get to it, that we've created a ladder, if you will, where the smaller the town is, the higher the threshold is to generate this recall election. Other than that, the verbiage is virtually the same as it was in the statute from 1957. So I'll go through the bill at this time. On page 1, we see that we are creating a new statute, and this is 1511-401. And so this is moving it under the municipal election provisions, which would allow it to be usable. On page 2, here we have the language that's basically the same as the ineffective statute, but we've amended it to create this hierarchy. You'll see on line 14, we've taken the, actually, if you start at 12, you'll see the 25%, that's in the original statute. And we've applied that now to only cities and towns greater than 4,000 population. Below that, we've added language so that between 3,999 down to 500, we now have a 30% threshold. And those towns smaller than 500 have a 35% threshold. So we've created a more difficult situation in those smaller communities. Other than that, the language is the same. So I'll just go on and explain that particular language from the old and the new statute. Here on page 3, we begin talking in Romanet number 2 about the process the city, town, or clerk would do to certify the petition. In Romanet 3, we have the time frame for the removal election. And in Romanet 4, on page 4, we provide for the event that there are no qualified challengers. And in this particular case, as in the original language, there will be no recall election if there's no qualified challenger. Down here in subparagraph B at the bottom of page 4, we deal with being more than one challenger, basically a primary type election. It's very abbreviated so that if there's more than one challenger to the person being recalled, you can get that narrowed down to just one. If the person being recalled chooses not to run for re-election in this recall election, then the winner of that primary would be the one to go forward to take the position. And if there were more than 2, only the top 2 would go into the recall election. And I'm just moving forward to page 6 and section 2, we repeal the unusual portion of statute. And with that, I ask for your favorable consideration of the bill. And Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Representative Bear. So I just want to make sure I have this correct. This would apply to municipalities and it would be elected officials only. So your mayor or your city council. But if your municipality had like a city manager, an unelected, you could not recall your city manager. But for like towns that do have a mayor who is also a city councilman, You could recall the elected official. So just mayors and city council, anybody else that would fall under this, do you know?
If there were an elected position, but no, for those city managers that are appointed, no, there would be no opportunity for recall for those.
Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little distracted.
I'll put 'em-
How about, I guess I am distracted. What about county commissioners or is it just municipalities?
Representative Bear, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Duncan. No, this would not apply to county commissioners. This is for cities and municipalities only. There is a recall mechanism for county commissioners, but it goes through the governor. It's basically, once the petition is submitted, the governor would choose whether or not that person would be removed. So it's a very different process. Thank you for the question.
Other questions, committee, at this time? Nope, not seeing any right now, Representative Bear. So let's take some public comment. Mr. Merrill from the ESPC, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Merrill, Executive Director of the Equality State Policy Center. I'm here to speak in opposition to this bill and to ask you respectfully to vote it down today. We oppose this bill for a simple but essential reason, and that's that elections matter. The results of elections matter, and the reason they matter is because we honor the results and we give the winners a term to do the job. And to put a finer point on it, Mr. Chairman, we already have a tried and true red, white, and blue way of removing elected officials that we don't like from office. It's called an election. And it's one of this country's greatest traditions. And it's a great Wyoming tradition too. We hold fair elections here and we honor the results. This bill would create a new avenue for not honoring the results. It would allow a minority of voters who wanted another candidate to win to basically force a do-over election, hoping to get a different result this time. It would be a new avenue for those who lost the election or didn't get the person they wanted elected to create an ongoing campaign against the rightful winner and use this official mechanism to cast aspersions, sow doubts with voters, and create an air of controversy and negativity around any elected official they don't like. So while supporters of this bill might argue that it's heightened democracy, I'd argue that it would, in practice, be incredibly unfair to our public service servants and anti-democratic. Mr. Chairman, I'd argue that the way we support our democracy and ensure it will endure is by honoring the results of our elections, period. And if we want somebody else in that office, we have the freedom and power to try to get a different person elected in the next regular election. And when somebody wins an election, we honor their service, regardless of whether we agree with everything they do. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I believe if this bill were to become law, it would have some unfortunate unintended consequences, not the least of which is that it would discourage civic-minded people from running for municipal office and serving their communities. It would discourage service because people would know, even if they won the election, they could be forced at any moment by a minority of voters to spend yet more time and more money rerunning the race, defending themselves, and defending their right to serve in the office they already won. This situation would not strengthen our democracy, it would undermine it because it would force many public servants to basically be in campaign mode all the time. Serving on the city council or as a mayor in one of our small communities in Wyoming is already hard enough. It's time consuming and it's often a pretty thankless job. Nobody in Wyoming serves on their local city council for fame and fortune and prestige. Everybody I've ever met in one of these positions has sought the office out of a sense of civic duty and because they want to try to solve problems, because they want to try to contribute something positive to their communities. And there are already plenty of disincentives for people to seek to serve in these offices in Wyoming. I think it would be unwise to further discourage service through a measure like this one before you. So let's honor our Constitution and our great tradition of public service in the state by honoring the results of our elections and saying no to bills like this one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll conclude my testimony, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Merrill in the SBC? I'm not seeing any currently, Mr. Merrill, but thank you for being here. Always appreciate it. Don't go too far. Mayor Siglin, are you still on and want to testify on House Bill 74? There he comes. Mr. Siglin, the floor is yours if you want it.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yep, we can hear and see you.
Okay. Yeah, you gotta love technology for a technically inept person like me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I'll echo some of the sentiments of the previous testimony that we just heard. And I would like to say, and it was mentioned by my good representative earlier, and one of her question is, in the state of Wyoming, for having these recalls, if you want to call them that, or removal from office, these would not apply to every elected official. And the problem I got with that is that every one of us, including you, the governor, everybody else, we all are elected. Not one of us is above the other when it comes to being duly elected. And that's how we got in our positions. So I think if you're going to have a bill, instead of being prejudiced or singling out just one group of elected officials, it should include all elected officials in the state, from the top down. Otherwise, that is just biased against us for wanting to be a mayor or council member and have to put up with a possible recall. So that is something I would suggest to be considered. And I know I just got an email today about interim topics, and I would ask my good representative, instead of moving this bill forward, to bring this up as a discussion in the interim. Because if you're going to single out one group of us, then that is very prejudicial. And you got to think about this. In the state of Wyoming, and these are not exact numbers, but if you just look at our 99 towns, think about it. You got 99 mayors, you got over 500 council members. And then we have a minority, and I'm not coming down hard on you guys, but we have a minority of the legislature trying to tell us that you people can be recalled, but nobody else in the state can. And as the previous testimony was heard, that there is a process for county commissioners, but that goes through the governor's office. So even they have a different process. The other point I have about it is something I didn't see in this bill, is the cost. Now, we have a person petition us. Does the town has to absorb the cost? They have to do the advertising. They have to do the printing of the ballots. We have to stage the election. We do that again. 1 month later, somebody else brings another petition because they don't like the person who just got elected. Here we go. We have to do it again. I could see this work a snowball doing it every month. The probability that's not, but the possibility, yes, that could very well happen. So I would ask this committee to consider all this, because when we have to deal with these elections like this, then that takes us away from doing the business of taking care of the town and the people that reside in it. Our focus has shifted. So I would ask the committee not to move this forward. I stand in opposition to it. I also sit on the WAM Board of Directors, which you'll probably hear from. They stand opposed to this. And as also mentioned in the testimony before, we do have a process for moving somebody that that the electorate doesn't think is doing a good job. And that's the next election, you just vote them out. So with that, I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions from Mayor Siglin? Not seeing any, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate you coming back for another bill. Always a pleasure seeing you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also like to thank the entire committee for the work that you people do for this constituents and the state.
Thank you. Mr. Decker, you're on deck. If you want to address House Bill 74, give him a second to see if his camera comes on or his mic comes off. I'm not seeing any, so we'll let Mr. Dines in as well here. Give him another second. Hi, Mr. Dines. The floor is yours if you want to talk to the committee about House Bill 74. Maybe not yet. Mr. Weaver, you have comment on House Bill 74. Your hand is raised.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I also want to thank the members of this committee, as the previous mayor had as well, for your work that you're doing for us. I'd like to share a couple of points about this. I've been a candidate a few times, and like many of you serving in public office and many of the other people on this call, I've knocked on a lot of doors and talked to a lot of people. And you know, I would hate to bring up anything to surprise the committee with, but at the risk of sharing something shocking, let me relate to you that I have never had a constituent tell me that this was something they wanted to see. I've never had a constituent tell me that what would improve their lives is an opportunity to be subjected to more campaigning and elections. No one has ever raised that view with me. I have a couple of questions about this proposal that I hope the committee would process as they consider their votes on it. One of those is, how will this work for cities that have adopted ward systems? I know that in Laramie, the city council wards or districts overlap with precincts in multiple legislative districts. Will the 25% threshold only apply to those specific wards? I assume that's the case, but the language isn't specific on that point, and that seems important. Will 25% of the eligible voters across the city be the necessary number of signatures, or only in that ward? I think that's something that should be clarified if this is to go much further. Second, I think this is going to cause some additional expenses, as Mayor Siglin mentioned to you before, Chairman and members of the committee. In Laramie, we currently pay the Albany County Clerk's Office to operate municipal elections for us. That wasn't always the case, but it was seen as more cost effective to do that over time. I think this is going to generate some additional costs that could be incurred repeatedly. And that's not currently budgeted for in most of the communities that I'm familiar with, and certainly not in the city of Laramie. And finally, I have some questions that are similar to some that you've already heard, which is, it seems interesting and unfortunate that that only municipal elected officials are going to be lucky enough to be subjected to recall provisions. We frequently deal with issues that affect a small number of people, and often some of these individuals have a pecuniary interest in some activity that the city council has to render a decision on. And I would also like you to consider perhaps that this should be something that individual municipalities would like to decide whether that or not they wanted to adopt, much as they can choose which city council system, strong mayor, or city council and city manager systems. Maybe they should be able to decide on whether or not they want to incorporate this as well. And I think that might be an improvement. I think it's worth telling you folks that it's often said here in my community in Laramie, that if you ever think you might want to run for the legislature or the county commission, one thing you should definitely not do is ever serve on the Laramie City Council first. And why is that the case? Well, it's because you have to make a lot of tough decisions. That's not to imply that other elected offices don't have to make a whole bunch of tough decisions. That's not my point. It's that these decisions will often make people upset, and it can be on some pretty community specific issues about neighborhoods, zoning, land use regulations, utility rates. And I think, as you've heard before, people in these offices are going to become very reluctant to make difficult but necessary choices. For example, for years in the city of Laramie, the choice was made to defer infrastructure maintenance because it was unpopular. It required the use of revenues towards big projects. And that cost this community a lot of money in the long run. And I can't help but think that potentially every time someone who is made angry by a decision from the members of the city council who are simply following their local ordinance that has been informed through engagement with the public over the years, could trigger one of these recall efforts. And you've heard some testimony to that effect already. And then finally, I would also mention that regardless of the current provisions that exist, it seems like in the interest of fairness and respect for the voters that this would be something that should apply to more than just municipal offices. I mean, maybe it could apply to water and fire districts, hospital boards, school boards, and then possibly the Board of County Commissioners. Just some concerns to consider. And I really very much appreciate the opportunity to share some testimony with you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. And I'd ask you to please consider some of this feedback that you're getting. And I do appreciate it. And I'm certainly available for questions if you have any.
Questions from Mayor Weaver? Not seeing any, Paul, but thank you for sticking around. Here's some more testimony.
Thank you.
Wham in the back of testimony. Come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Municipalities, representing the aforementioned mayors and standing in opposition to this bill. I will say that I like testifying better this session because I get to take my mask off and sit in a more comfortable chair.
I thought it was me as chairman of corporations, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
But yeah, on account of that too, I do appreciate, this is a committee that's done a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of our members. And I certainly do appreciate that. I'll also mention that I grew up in a large family, and so a little background noise, I actually concentrate a little better with a little background noise. So that's all good for me today. You know, I want to be my best diplomat, but I will be my best, and I will be diplomatic, but as was mentioned earlier, this bill is written curiously narrow. And so I question the appropriateness of that a little bit. I'm not necessarily, I'm not going to recommend that we add everybody else to this bill. You know, that was kind of course, that's been mentioned in here, and that certainly crossed my mind, but I'm not going to recommend that we add everybody else to this. In fact, I started looking at, you know, what percentages were on petitions and all that stuff, and how could this be improved? And I just couldn't envision a way to improve this bill to the point that we could actually support it. So I'm not going to take your time with what I think some of those shortcomings are, other than to say, you know, I couldn't echo better what's been said about elections being important, about there being a method to remove elected officials, about I have served in states with these kind of laws, and it's a terrible distraction when there's a recall election going on. The wheels of government kind of grind to a halt, and everybody's attention is on the election. So there's a lot to be said about just about the inefficiencies that this would cause. Does that mean that there'll never be, you know, that a community will never elect somebody and then decide maybe they could have made a better choice? Yeah, I'm sure that has and will continue to happen on occasion, and we do have a process for correcting that. It's called the next election. And finally, I guess I would just say what I'd like you to do is follow the procedure you've already established with House Joint Resolution 4 of this legislative session, which would establish a constitutional amendment to have a process for recalling state officials, which was submitted in this legislative session and surprisingly died after failing to be introduced before the deadline. So I would urge you to give this bill the same treatment and consider it no further after we leave here today. Thank you. I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for Wham? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Frazier, could you speak to the ability of local municipalities to carry on elections? I think in most places, the county clerk takes care of that function. And what kind of burden would that create for a municipality?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chair, to the representative. I appreciate the question. It also sheds light on the fact that it not only would become a burden on the city, but also the county, especially specifically the county clerk's office. And although counties, do conduct that election, so it comes at a cost to their resources, a lot of those costs are passed on to the municipalities even when the county's doing it. So whether it's a city election being run by a city or a city election being run by the county, there are costs associated with that are borne by both the city and the county. And you've heard me sit up here and bellyache often enough about how tight our budgets are, especially when you're in a small community. Interestingly, I was sitting back there thinking today as we were talking with some of the numbers on a previous bill, and we talk in such big dollar amounts when we're talking about state budgets and that kind of thing. And it's kind of interesting to think about how small some of our small town budgets are, and how numbers that might seem really small in these halls are actually very large. And the cost of an election, the cost for a small city to do, unscheduled election or elections would be very significant.
You would agree in 4 years, if you have a bad city councilman or a mayor who's causing trouble, it can be a long time to wait till the next election, and the expense in some cases could be worth it. I mean, depending on that elected official, that is not as easy to be removed as, say, a county commissioner in accordance with other statutes. I'm guessing that's why it's narrowly tailored. If you have a bad city councilman or mayor, something happens and they won't resign on their own volition, you don't charge them with a felony, there's not a lot of other recourses. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What are those other recourses if they are criminal, if they are charged with some other, are there other ways to remove one?
Mr. Frazier, if you know.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not an expert there. But if we did want to have, if we did want to go further down that road, I certainly could have Wham's attorney address that. But you've both mentioned it, depends on what you mean by a bad councilman. If by a bad councilman, you mean a criminal, yes, there's ways to remove that person. If as a bad councilman, you mean somebody who you disagree with their policy objectives, then there aren't those ways. But again, that's part of the system we live in, is that that we don't always agree with what.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, I'm
let
sorry.
me help him out.
Yes, thank you.
If not just a difference in opinion or anything like that, that's not where my question is going. If there's some sort of behavior or something nefarious that a mayor or a councilman's doing, you do have ways to remove them, correct? I guess is my question. If they're, I guess my question is if they are doing something illegal to where there's a criminal, where they can be prosecuted, you
Yes.
could remove them, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Criminal, yeah.
that's where I was going, if there is criminal potential prosecution, you could remove them. If they're embezzling, if they're,
Absolutely.
you could remove them. You wouldn't have to wait for the election,
Yes,
correct?
through the chair, absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But on that point, what would your thoughts be on the circumstances of is a mayor or somebody who's just kind of a train wreck. They're not doing anything illegal. They're not doing anything even particularly untoward. It's simply that they're a terrible leader. They suck at their job. I mean, and I get that there's some checks and balances to the system with, that they're not, every mayor is to one degree or another sort of beholden to the city council. So it's not like they're, the dictator, but just if they're really bad at their job, illegality aside, and they're running the place into the ground, just, I mean, what are your thoughts on that as far as it's just short of a recall election?
Mr. Fraser, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've shared my background here. I've been a city manager in 4 different governments, 4 different states. I've spent 10 years in this same position in the state of Nevada and as well as here. So I've seen, you know what I mean? It's kind of my policy not to talk bad about my bosses, but I certainly have seen it all. And what you're describing, it's not like that's never happened. And usually when, in worst case, sometimes you have a few kind of inefficient years, but usually when usually when the circumstance you talk about comes up, you see a tremendously increased engagement by the public. And when the public is engaged and is contacting their, just like when you're, just like you guys, when the public's engaged on something, they contact their representatives, they show up at the meetings, they make their voice heard. And usually, since it's a representative government, usually when those who are being represented make their voices heard, their representatives take note. And as you mentioned, interestingly, I can't tell you how many times in my career I've said, well, this is why we have a council, not a king, is because you do have a council, and on the city level, you do have a council elected, and things and policy decisions that are made by majority vote. And usually that takes care of it, in my experience. Usually that majority of representatives doing what their people are telling them they want done takes care of those issues. And in the worst of cases, say criminal issues, there are ways that that's taken care of.
There is a process where the other elected members in that municipality could censure, take a vote of no confidence. I mean, there are other ways of escalating the situation that are potential. That'd be correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And of course, those tools vary, from city to city a little bit, but generally following what you just described.
Further questions for Wham, Representative Roscoe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fraser, is there any way, is it difficult to determine that the population of the city itself, I don't think the voting records show. I'm not sure. Is it easy to come up with this population that we would need to do this, that would be living within the town and not just the county?
Mr. Fraser, if you know.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think you're asking, is it difficult to, in terms of the thresholds enunciated on page 2, is it difficult to say? There are standards. There's a state demographic office, and we do have populations that we refer to the city, even though they will have varied some from the last census. There are annually estimates of that made. And so I don't see that as necessarily being problematic.
Thank you. Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fraser, in the history of municipalities, how many mayor or how many elected officials have been removed under the current process, to your knowledge?
Well, none in Wyoming, because we don't have a process, right? Do you mean by in Wyoming or nationwide? Or? Oh,
I just mean in Wyoming.
In a criminal process, do you know, Mr. Fraser?
I wouldn't know the answer to that question.
All right.
I got to follow up.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
Mr. Fraser, and so it says any form of municipal government. I think there's 5 forms, but what's our most common forms throughout the state of Wyoming?
Sure, Mr. Fraser, quickly, if you know.
Two forms dominate in the state of Wyoming. One is mayor council, the other is council manager. Mayor council, sometimes referred to as strong mayor, in which case, you know, there's three branches of government. In a mayor council government, the mayor is the executive, the council is the legislative, and if the courts, of course, are the judicial. In a council manager form of government, the manager is the chief executive. The mayor is the chairman of the legislature, which is the city council, and again, the courts are the judicial branch, and that's most common in Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frazier. Committee, we're almost running out of time, so let me close public comment and let Representative Bear, last responses before I take for action the bill. Or Representative Bear, you have a question?
Well, just for Representative Bear, I have a question.
Go ahead.
The language that you used with one minor amendment that you mentioned for the case of small towns was lifted from the repealed section. And you mentioned, why did we never discover this before if we had a whole section of statute that didn't apply to anybody in the state? And was it your intention to make this easier to apply, I guess? Well, obviously that's the case, but how did you find this out?
Representative Bear, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative, I found this out because of an issue in my city. But it was in the news in several different communities that this has been attempted before. As I mentioned earlier, it's been adjudicated to the district level. But I think the reason nothing's happened about this statute being in the wrong part of the law is just because it's so rare. I mean, I do think that this is an uncommon event, and usually it's going to be pretty extreme circumstances, but it gives the people the ability to have a remedy if there are extreme conditions. And I think that's the issue here, is allowing the people to have, one lever that's not out there. For instance, in my city, we have a mayor that was instrumental in the removal of several of our city council members until the point where the elected representatives of the people were not available because they'd been appointed by the council and the mayor. And so it became a situation where more public involvement wasn't helpful. In fact, more public involvement happened and it just ran up against a wall. And I think that the issue that we see in other towns is, as the good chairman mentioned, you could have an issue where expenditures are being just out of control, and the people's ability to get some fiscal responsibility may be too late if you have to wait till the next election. So I think timeliness is sometimes important in these small communities where they don't have a lot of funding to take care of things. And if you had a mismanagement, as the Representative Hunt mentioned, you may need to act quickly. And anytime you do this type of a process, it's not quick anyway. I would mention that I think that some good points were brought up in the testimony, and it would be a friendly amendment to put some sideboards on this type of an activity where it can't happen too close to an election, either the previous election or the next election. And I would say something like 6 months or maybe longer. But it needs to be reasonable, and the committee really needs to think about the people and what their ability might be. I think that type of an amendment would be friendly and it would be wise, just because it would help keep the cost down so that you weren't running into one of these opportunities too close to an election where you're going to spend that money anyway. And with that, I'll stand for more questions if you have them.
Any last questions? Okay, we'll close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure on House Bill 74?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by Representative Hunt, seconded by Representative Blackburn. Discussion or amendments? If the bill moves, I would bring an amendment on the floor. It does worry me on this, of all the qualified electors entitled to vote. In most of our other election statutes, it's based on the last election cycle of who's still qualified. And it may be good to have this language, right? Because if you get somebody doing nefarious things, people who've never voted before might come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I'm qualified to vote. I've never done it, but it's that important. But I could also see, people who, if voting is a privilege, it's also a right, but that language, I think, should mirror the rest of our statutes, but I can bring that on the floor at the appropriate time if necessary. Other amendments now, committee? Representative Hunt, go ahead.
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I know we need to get going. to that note, be happy to work with the board potentially on another amendment for the percentage versus population. And I know that they've tried to address that here, but I have a community in my district. Literally population 15, 1/3 of the town is on the city council. And there's a split right down the middle of that population over a particular issue there. It's a long going thing. But my point is that there is a picture perfect example of where I think that could be come up with an issue. Because it's not any one person's fault. It's just a disagreement. 15 people, not a lot of leeway. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's true. You get 4 or 5, 4 of them every time. Okay, I'm with you. All right, committee on further discussion or amendment? Question being called. If you call the roll on House Bill 74.
Representative Blackburn. I'm sorry, was that aye? Okay, thank you. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chair Air.
Yes, aye.
Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire, no. Representative Roscoe. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Aye.
5-4, no.
Well, Representative Bear, certainly appreciate you coming today. And committee, I would say this is a relevant topic. That's a lot of discussion in the state. I've got a lot of emails. So as we're talking about election laws through the interim, I'll probably put this on the interim list under election issues to at least have some more testimony and some more hearings on if Wyoming wants to go this route. Thank you very much again.